Hello all. Welcome to the ClearDATA and AWS webinar, Building HIPAA-Compliant Applications Using Infrastructure as Code. My name is Patrick Harrington, and I work on the Enterprise Marketing team here at AWS. I'm here with Christopher Crosby, a Partner Solutions Architect at AWS, and Adam Greenfield, ClearDATA's Director of Engineering, both of whom will be speaking shortly. First, a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, but you can send in questions through the questions panel, which will be answered in the Q&A following the event. So after this event, we will be sending a copy of the recording to all participants. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Chris and Adam.
Thanks, Patrick. This is Chris, and I'm a healthcare partner architect here at Amazon Web Services. So this means I get to help our healthcare customers either build or move their applications onto the AWS platform. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the AWS platform and how it could be used for HIPAA workloads. So this picture represents the broad strokes of what the AWS platform provides. There's more than 40 services that you can use to take away that undifferentiated heavy lifting of IT services. Now, the services range all the way from things like workspaces, which is a virtual desktop interface in the cloud, to highly durable object storage that's currently storing trillions of objects and regularly peaks at millions of requests per second. Now, this is an overview of the platform today, but I can tell you it's growing quickly. So in 2008, when we started, AWS only offered 8 services, but in 2012, we released 160 significant new services or features. In 2013, that number jumped to 280. And last year, we released 516 significant new services and features. This is an 80% year-over-year growth, and I can tell you that we're well on the way to topping that again this year. So why AWS? Why choose one of these AWS services? What makes all of them a little bit different? So the main thing here is there's no upfront capital expense. I remember when I was a developer, the headaches that I would go through to convince my manager that if I had a good idea, we should go out and purchase some hardware to do that. We would put money into the capital budget. We'd wait for a server to get shipped to us. It would then get racked and stacked in the data center, and then finally we could test out that idea. The cloud, it really lets you test those ideas fast and figure out what's a great idea and what's not. You also can get very low cost through our commodities of scale. We've had over 48 price drops since our inception. And the main thing here is, the takeaway is you only pay for what you use. So an example of someone in the healthcare space is Philips is creating a petabyte of medical imaging data each month. And instead of going out and buying this huge storage infrastructure, they only need to pay for what data they actually generate each month by taking advantage of AWS. And then obviously the security compliance, that's what separates us from other cloud providers and probably why many of you are here today. This is really our strong suit and why so many customers trust us with their PHI, and large healthcare enterprises like IMS Health have declared themselves to be all in on the AWS platform. So as far as our compliance goes, AWS has achieved a number of internationally recognized certifications and accreditations, ISO 27001, SOC 123, FedRAMP. At this point, I'm going to quit listing off acronyms and just recommend you go check out our compliance websites, which is going to make this full list available. And under NDA, you can actually obtain copies of our third-party audits, which you can then map to your own internal controls if you need to. But let's focus in on one compliance piece in particular, because that's what we're here to talk about today, and this is our HIPAA compliance program. As most of you on this webinar probably realize, this is the legal responsibility that covered entities and their business associates have to protect patient information. So HIPAA on AWS follows with our shared responsibility model, and it means that you, the customer, are protecting the PHI data and that you're only using AWS services which are covered by the BAA, allowing you to protect PHI information. So what are those services? These are the services which are currently covered under the Amazon Business Associates Agreement. Customers may use all services within an account that's been flagged for HIPAA, but may only process, store, or transmit the ePHI in the services you see on this page. So if you're familiar with the AWS HIPAA program already, you may see some new services on this slide. Dynamo, RDS, MySQL and Oracle, and EMR are all recent additions. You may also now terminate SSL on the ELB, which provides some additional features that you could have not gotten from just the TCP mode alone. So, in addition to keeping your PHI in those particular services, we do, in those eligible services, there are also some additional requirements. Customers must encrypt ePHI in transit and at rest. This means the data must be encrypted even if you're in a private VPC. So you got to either wrap the protocols that you're using in something like SSL or at the network layer with something like IPsec. Customers must use EC2 dedicated instances for instances processing, storing, or transmitting ePHI. So this feature guarantees that your PHI will not be stored on the same host as another customer's data. And finally, customers must record and retain activity related to the use and access of ePHI. So meeting all these requirements is often why a customer will choose to go and get some additional help from an AWS partner like ClearDATA. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Adam. And Adam, can you talk a little bit more about how ClearDATA helps our healthcare customers?
Certainly. Thank you, Chris. So as Chris mentioned, AWS provides a strong foundation of security and compliance for us to build solutions on top of. ClearDATA goes a few steps further. So we take the foundational services that Amazon provides under BAA, layer on top our own set of managed services to help customers maintain a secure, compliant environment and to meet some of the needs and requirements for storing protected health information. When we look across ClearDATA's entire environment, we are responsible for building and designing secure cloud environments for healthcare providers. We work with partners such as AWS to deliver best-in-breed overall cloud platform management. So going much above and beyond the infrastructure, helping with things like operating system level concerns, patching, things of those nature that would normally sit with the customer's responsibility in the shared responsibility model. As we look at customers adopting modern cloud platforms like Amazon, we have a number of new thoughts and concerns when we think about deployment. The need and sort of the benefit from a cost perspective of looking at the platform as a flexible amount of dynamic capacity rather than more the traditional capacity management model we've employed in IT across other industries where you build for the high watermark of your need. So you have to build a system that can run under the worst possible operating conditions as far as load goes. The desire and sort of ability to manage applications between multiple availability zones within a region. So not just thinking in terms of a single data center anymore, but rather a diverse set of segmented availability zones that you can use to deploy redundant applications in ways that really weren't possible in a single data center model. The move towards using ephemeral infrastructure, so an instance being built and replaced as part of normal operating procedure rather than running for months, years, sometimes. As Chris mentioned, the speed of the platform evolution within Amazon is really unprecedented. Just last year, there were several roadmap announcements that fundamentally changed how healthcare customers are deploying on top of the Amazon platform today and brought some exciting new features in the key management service and other things of that nature. I'll turn it back over to Chris to talk a little bit more about the platform services we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I'm going to bring back up that initial diagram that we showed of our platform. And I'd just like to point out some of the developer tools that we have that are going to make turning your infrastructure into code and being able to comply with HIPAA a little bit easier and more automated. So one of the main tools or services that help us do this that we're going to focus on in today's talk is CloudFormation. CloudFormation is a code base that you can use to encapsulate all the infrastructure in AWS. This is going to allow you to create repeatable infrastructure. So what you want to do is take all your existing instructions, policies, run books that you have for automating infrastructure and remove that manual aspect. CloudFormation can keep track of what's going to be provisioned first, what components are going to cause a rollback, what needs to be created versus what you can continue from, and all this is going to let you programmatically replicate a dev, test, prod environment with the click of the button instead of having to go through and needing to manually read instructions to create these different environments. So an analogy for CloudFormation might be something like a 3D printer. So you give a 3D printer a CAD and out pops this 3D object. Well, the blueprint for CloudFormation is JSON. JSON can let you keep a version history and use tools like Git to manage your infrastructure the same way you would your application code. So this can really be helpful with HIPAA because you can put in and enforce certain policies that you may have by providing templates to developers that comply with all of your HIPAA framework. That's going to be a starting point for your developers. And if you're not a fan of JSON, we do have a GUI called CloudFormer, which will let you create that JSON based on a lot of VPC. And a couple other services I'm just going to touch on quickly that are also going to be talked about in this talk is AWS Config and AWS CloudTrail. So AWS Config, this is an inventory management system or service. And I'll tell you from working in the compliance space, this is just one of those services that when the auditors see, their eyes just light up. This takes that Excel spreadsheet that you used to have in your data centers that's populated with inventory and server state, and it automates that entire process so you can go in, look at all of your servers, and look at the entire state history of what happened on that server. And another component, another service, is that AWS CloudTrail, which is going to log all of your API calls and the entire infrastructure log history for your AWS environment. And with that, I'd like to turn back over to Adam so he can talk a little bit about how these services were actually used at ClearDATA.
Sure, thanks, Chris. So as Chris mentioned, we use a number of the AWS tool sets to really achieve some of what we believe is the best-in-breed automation for the healthcare space currently. When you look at why these concepts are important specifically in the healthcare space, obviously we are faced with a number of unique challenges with the protection of PHI, as well as the need to remain compliant within our operations. The ability to take tools like CloudFormation and, as Chris said, really outline a blueprint for an environment which is turned into a complete model of the running environment is an incredibly powerful experience when you have to walk through and prove to someone that you really are following the procedures and controls that you've set up internally. So when you can take a CloudFormation template and really pass it around, have it reviewed by multiple teams, potentially an information security organization, a network security organization, subject matter experts that are really strong within the security and compliance mindset to make sure that you have gone through and checked off all the boxes as far as your internal controls are concerned. The ability then to take information from CloudFormation and the other services that Chris mentioned, AWS Config, really looking at that version piece of your infrastructure, as well as using CloudTrail to feed logs into whatever your security event management system is. All these things can lead to a level of security and compliance that hadn't been traditionally possible within the normal data center model. So what do we use to stitch these things together? Well, we use a lot of the same open source tooling that service providers have been using for a long time. So we have Git involved, where we take all the JSON templates that are generated for CloudFormation and version them just like we would actual software code. So we have a complete picture of the running environment from the time it's initially built out through all the changes that are made throughout its operation, ultimately what it looked like right before it was decommissioned. When we look at this workflow overall, we stitch in a number of other open source tools to the process. So if you look on the top left corner here, we really start out with some internal tooling that we've built out to help generate these JSON templates. Because while they're certainly easy to understand for a developer, a lot of operations folks, as well as customers that aren't maybe as technically savvy as others, will start to have problems just writing JSON natively. So you can make the experience much, much better with some basic tooling. So we go through that process. We offer it as part of our customer portal, as part of our API ultimately. And we generate those using a number of internal and customer-facing tools. So when we get to the actual point of having a JSON-based CloudFormation template, at this point, remember, we have the ability to go out. We can actually test it in an Amazon account. So we can build out an entire network infrastructure to make sure it's going to behave in the way that we expect. We can actually test it in real-world scenarios. As we go through the process of actually getting it into Git, getting it reviewed by one of your peers, it's actually stored in the same, like I said, version control technology that most companies are using today to version their software. From Git, we go right into a Jenkins process. This can be triggered with either a build hook on the Jenkins side that's periodically monitoring the Git repository or a Git hook, which actually proactively calls out to Jenkins to start the build process. But in this case, our Jenkins process will actually go out and deploy this into production environments. So based on our configuration management database, we know what template file matches out to what running stack in which AWS account, and can actually walk through the entire deployment workflow just based on that information being submitted into Git without any additional user intervention. After we go through the CloudFormation process, the resulting CloudFormation stack is in the running state of the account. If one of the resources fails to deploy, if there's a problem in the template and rollback occurs, we get notifications using Amazon's SNS system. So it will actually tell us that the deployment has failed, so we can perform actions, go through and audit the logs involved, determine why that failure occurred. When you look at this model of automation, you have certain services that need to be configured. So as I mentioned, as part of our platform, we build monitoring in as a core covered service for all ClearDATA customers. So what we need to do is we need to be able to indicate certain things about this asset. So we actually use EC2 instance tags for configuration. So in addition to the CloudFormation tags that you may be familiar with at the top, if you guys have used CloudFormation, those are built in internal to AWS, can't be modified. We also have a ClearDATA namespace of tags that we use. So we define an asset ID, which maps the ephemeral instance that's deployed to an asset back in our configuration management database that has a defined role, set of software, those sorts of things. We set a customer ID that's unique to ClearDATA, so that identifies the customer specifically within the ClearDATA environment. We have the ClearDATA monitored service tag, which actually is interesting in that it tells our monitoring system at a basic level which services we should be monitoring about that machine. So this tells it to configure ICMP, SSH, and DNS monitoring. We have processes that go through periodically, audit the information in the account, pull it into a DynamoDB database, and we'll actually go through, look for common misconfigurations. We'll actually check to make sure security procedures and controls are in place. Make sure, for instance, that a bucket that is indicated to contain PHI has a bucket policy that requires encryption at upload. But it can also look for these tags and perform actions on them. So when we spin up a new instance, it can be added to the monitoring system automatically and doesn't require any external process or any external data other than what's already stored in the instance tags. When you look at what you can really deliver in healthcare specifically using configuration management and CloudFormation, the idea that you could build out an entire environment based strictly on data that you store in a version repository is incredibly powerful from an audit experience perspective. You can replicate your environments exactly when you need to reproduce what's gone wrong to look at the difference between a freshly deployed version of your environment with an environment that's having a problem. You can also perform advanced concepts like blue-green deployment, where you actually deploy a new set of your production infrastructure for every software release. The flexibility this offers for your development process and zero downtime or near zero downtime deploys is really unmatched with any other platform today. We have the ability, as part of the deployment, not just to have one CloudFormation template, but many of these stacks involved. Through tooling like the stuff we built in our portal, as well as the open source tools that we mentioned, you really have the ability to perform advanced orchestration using these stacks based on other events within the infrastructure. Someone submitting a new version of the template, a peer review process being completed, any of these things become triggers which you can start to build your operational support software around. There's a lot of great innovative or integrated feedback rather from the AWS platform. So we mentioned CloudTrail, we mentioned SNS. We also leverage the config service and the data that's written out by that, as well as the Amazon billing data that's written into S3, with a combination of Lambda functions to actually pull that data out as it's being written into these locations and do things with them. So we can version information into our configuration management database. We can start to look at this when we have to go back and tie it into security event management systems and other SIEM systems. So we can use all that power and through the automatic configuration of CloudFormation get consistently configured notification policies that aren't dependent on the person clicking through the wizard to make sure you're really getting a complete picture of the feedback for an environment. Those feedback loops are really a lot of foundational operational security we can provide. So leveraging those, you can look for someone trying to brute force access the console. You can look for unauthorized changes within the account, so things that aren't happening through CloudFormation potentially. We had the CIO of a very large healthcare brand stand up during one of the sessions in the New York Summit this year and actually talk about how he has a process and procedure where if an instance is spun up outside of his process, it's not tagged appropriately, that instance is automatically shut down after 10 minutes. So you can implement security controls like that that really make a difference when you're trying to operate within these environments. You have a number of great data transports that are available. as Chris mentioned, there's a subset of these that can be used to contain PHI, but you can use all these within HIPAA-tagged accounts, meaning you still have the ability to use these services, even where they're not appropriate to store PHI, to transfer metadata about the operation of systems. So monitoring state data, information of that nature, can actually be transmitted through these systems and tied into your overall automation platform. Then you have the additional CMDB and SIEM systems that we bring to the table. And overall, this can really build a best-in-class healthcare platform using a lot of very innovative open source tools that allow people in the healthcare space to develop applications similarly to how people have been in other verticals. So not needing to worry as much about the security and compliance aspects of every aspect of the deployment, understanding that the foundation and controls have been built into the platform from the ground up to provide a development environment where rapid deployment and things like that can be a reality. As we look through the process of electrifying the fence and really being confident in that hardening and that sort of environmental control level, you have all sorts of management challenges that you have to work through when you're moving in any utility cloud environment. When you have sort of innovative cloud platforms like AWS, the challenges are even more because there are hundreds of services potentially across the account. So you have to worry about managing all these resources. You need to worry about making sure, as Chris mentioned, that at every stage in the process you are protecting PHI in transit and encrypted at rest. You have to go through with all these accounts and look through a massive amount of data, so the only realistic way to do this effectively for a healthcare organization that wants to remain compliant across all of these environments is to look at the automation you could build around this process. So actually having systems, as I mentioned, going through, checking for account configuration mistakes, checking for issues that may pop up during normal operation, looking at the state of all these many assets and all the information the Amazon API can provide you about your infrastructure that really wasn't possible in a traditional data center model. You can go through and actually build out automatic remediation for some of these steps. So if you have one instance that's unhealthy, an auto-scaling group, terminate that instance and begin replacing it. If you need to go through and terminate an old version of an application after the new one's been up and running for a certain number of hours, you can do all that through scripted automation.